Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
Today at T-Mobile, I'm joined by a special co-anchor.
What up, everybody? It's your boy, Big Snoop Deal Double G.
Snoop, where can people go to find great deals?
Head to T-Mobile.com and get 4 iPhone 16s with Apple Intelligence on us, plus 4 lines for $25.
That's quite a deal, Snoop. And when you switch to T-Mobile, you can save versus the other big guys' comparable plans plus streaming.
Respect. We up out of here.
See how you can save on wireless and streaming versus the other big guys at T-Mobile.com/switch. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Achtung, welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. A podcast and a live cast with me, Al Murray.
All rolled into one
with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. Talking about, because there's the news today of the death of Group Captain John Paddy Hemingway, who is the last Battle of Britain pilot to die at 105. Yes, it is unbelievable, isn't it, Jim?
Mm.
Yeah.
It is. It's really sad. I know Brian, his son, a little bit, and Brian messaged me today and saying it would have absolutely tickled his father Pink that he died on St. Patrick's Day. He was a very proud Irishman. He was. He was in a nursing home for the last few years of his life. He kept very much to himself. Obviously super dashing back in 1940 during the Second World War. And for most of his life after his time in the RAF, no one was really interested. He was one of the few. There was they excavated one of his Hurricanes that he was shot down in during the Battle of Britain, and found it. So bits of his Hurricane were recovered, and he had a little bit of fame from that. But certainly in the last sort of 20 years or so, he sort of largely kind of disappeared.
Well, he fell off the lists the people that were known about, didn't he? So
and Brian got in touch with me a few years ago when he became the last surviving pilot and said, would I be interested in writing his biography? And I was extremely interested in writing his biography. I was also extremely interested in doing like a Brothers in Arms, but of 85th Squadron, because 85th Squadron were really, really interesting. And I'll get onto that in a second, but the truth is that he'd said all that he was ever going to say, and I didn't want to turn into a kind of sort of tabloid hack trying to sort of eke out more than was there. He was up for meeting me and having a chat, but he made it absolutely clear that he had nothing else. There was nothing new he could say that he hadn't already said 100 times before, and. When you go back over what he'd said 100 times before, it wasn't a huge amount, if I'm brutally honest.
No,
that speaks volumes of his modesty and self-effacing nature, and in many ways, it's very much to his credit.
Well, amongst the things he said, I think are very interesting, and which sort of point in the direction of this sort of taciturn attitude to it. He said when he was first scrambled on the night of the 3rd of September 1939, in those few moments, I realized that I must now shrug off sentimentality of all sorts and henceforth cope at all levels entirely on my own, no matter what the circumstances. And you
go.
think that there's a summary of what it took to be a fighter pilot, but also why then after you might think, well, there's nothing to say. I coped with this by myself. I dealt with this the way I was going to, and that's that. I mean, I think it is. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't he? Terry Clark was the air gunner who died at 101. Was the last one before Paddy Hemingway. But he said fate was not democratic. New pilots with just a few hours in hurricanes did not have the instincts of us more experienced pilots, and were very vulnerable in combat. For that reason, many did not last long. I mean, it's all very, very matter of fact, the stuff he had to say.
Yeah. F-1T happens.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, there is it is interesting this, because on Fridays, I mean, I was telling you about this yesterday when we were at Hendon, because that's actually the fact, ladies and gentlemen, we do spend our entire time just hanging around in Second World War places doing Second World War stuff.
And talking about it.
If it's Monday, it's Hendon. But basically on Friday, I met Britain's oldest man.
Yes.
Donald Rose, who was in the 1st 7th Queen's Royal Regiment in 131 Brigade as part of 7th Armored Division, and who had a storied war of going to North Africa, joining up in July of 1940, going to North Africa, going to Italy, doing Avalanche, coming back out, going into Northwest Europe, and ending up all the way up in Belsen after he'd been moved to the Wiltshires. And he was so old. I mean, he's 110. He's the country's oldest man. He was so old. It really did feel like speaking to another age completely. And I know we often talk about how the Second World War really isn't very long ago. But when you meet a 110-year-old, it feels like an awfully long time ago, doesn't it? I mean,
it does, and it makes me feel a little bit older as well, because when I was first going around interviewing Battle of Britain veterans, I mean, Battle of Britain was my entry point to my let's say obsession with the Second World War. And and it was Spitfires, and I've told you many times the story of the cricket match and the Spitfire and all the rest of it. That was my entry point. And my second entry point was picking up Spitfire pilot by David Crook, who was in 609 Squadron based at Middle Wallop, just down the road from me here in Wiltshire.
Yeah.
And so it was Battle of Britain. And the first thing I ever wrote about the Second World War was a novel called The Burning Blue, which was a big sort of sweeping tale of love, loss and war, and set to the azure blue skies of southern England in 1940 and all the rest of it. And great fun I had to. There he is. He's on the, I think he's second left in that picture. And I was so lucky that I got to all these people when I first met Jeff Wellen, for example, he was 79. 70 freaking 9. He died when he was 90 something, 95 or 6 or something. But these guys were all pretty hale. Alan Wright was in good form. Tom Neal was in great form. There were plenty of others besides. Maurice Mounsden, people like him, the wonderful Pete Brothers. I mean, just these guys were legends all. And I was so lucky to catch them while I could. And I just found the whole world that they inhabited back in 1940 completely intoxicating.
Yeah.
And this morning, with the news of Paddy going, I've just found myself thinking about Jeff and Tom and Alan Wright, and I can remember every one of those interviews. I can remember every one of their conversations I had, where I was when I first met them, some of the things they said. I can remember verbatim some of the stuff Tom said. I mean, we were quoting him yesterday when we were talking about Spitfire Mark 1 versus the 109. He had this fantastic way of answering the phone, and every time I'd pick him up, I go, "Hello, Tom, it's James here," and he'd go, "James Holland, as I live and breathe." Every time. And he was just fantastic. And I remember him saying, the Messerschmitt 109E could do the 3 things you need to do in air-to-air combat in the summer of 1940. Could climb faster, die faster, and it had more firepower in the combat zone than any other aircraft. And you just go, wow, You know, it's just you're just hanging off every word that they're saying. And Jeff in his pub, you know, first time I met him down in Mullion, you know, he wanted to meet in the pub, and this was in the day where you could still smoke, and you know, you had ashtrays there and stuff. So he picks up my pint, picks up the ashtray, and goes, "So here's me and my spit. There's this Emmy coming down on me," and you're sort of thinking, God, that's just fantastic. You know, that's what you want from a Battle of Britain veteran. And then they get older and older and older, and suddenly they're not these vibrant. You know, there's such a gulf between a 105-year-old and an 80-year-old. I mean, obviously it's 25 years, but I mean, it's you know, an 80-year-old is still pretty vital.
Yeah.
Whereas someone who's 98 just isn't. And with the possible exception of Colin Bell, who defies all logic. And I'm sure will break the record as Britain's oldest man in due course. But they're just not. And so I feel eternally lucky and grateful that I hit on this obsession at the time that I did, and that I still had a chance to see them. But you know, the passage of time is a cruel mistress.
It certainly is.
And you know, it seems absolutely astonishing to me that's it. But it's, you know, here we are in 2025, and it is now moved out of living memory.
Well, it's not so long since Harry Patch. I'm sure most of the people watching, certainly British people watching, remember Harry Patch's passing, and how that meant that the First World War was now somehow going to change in our imagination. I was very interesting. The other aspect of that I think is very interesting. Joseph Quinn has been in touch saying, "Hi guys, I've been speaking to the media in the Republic of Ireland for half the day today. The pick up of this story has been incredible back in Ireland. He was Irish."
Yeah.
This is an Irish, and in the RAF and in the Royal Air Force until 1974. So a career RAF officer, who then spent another, you know, a good 30 years flying in the Royal Air Force. You know, because after all, the plenty of Irish people served. Here we are as an Irishman. Marty's photo is 91 as an Irishman obsessed with the Battle of Britain. So it's been a point of pride that the last of the few was an Irishman. Sad they've all left us, but eternally grateful for their sacrifice. See, this is one of these interesting things, isn't it? Because after all, the United Kingdom and Ireland's relationship was a different one in 1940. The Free State had only just begun. You know, within. Wasn't even 20 years old when the Battle of Britain came along, and the Irish people joined up to serve and joined up to be fighter pilots, and you know, right on the very sharpest of sharp ends in 1940. I don't know what it means, but it says that our fate, you know, the entanglement of Irish fates with British fates and vice versa, and the debt that's owed to those servicemen and men like you know, Paddy. It is absolutely ghastly that, of course, because he's Irish and he's in a British unit, he is known as Paddy. I mean, heaven help us. But you know, plus ça change. I think it's. I mean, I think it's really, you know, it speaks of that too, of a completely different time. And I think it's really wonderful that it's been picked up this way in the Republic, and particularly, you know, as you say, he dies on St. Patrick's Day.
Well, and he was also, you know, and he was part of 85 Squadron, which was a sort of legendary squadron in the Battle of France as well as the Battle of Britain. One of the great heroes of the 85 Squadron was Dickie Lee, who was this incredibly good-looking young man. You know, and do you remember we looked at that photo of all those sort of pilot officers yesterday? Yeah. And I was going, God, you can just see who they are. Yeah. You know, they're that kind of sort of generation of young men that just look so familiar. Yeah. And Dickie Lee was just good looking, strong, tall, dark haired, you know, epitome of young manhood and dashing fighter pilotness. Well,
the lads in this photo we have here, it's exactly what you've got. You know, you can see that those who are insouciant, those who'd rather not have their picture taken, the guy in the back with his kit,
and those who'd quite like to wear a motorcycle jacket rather than jacket there. I mean, just amazing. But anyway, Dickie Lee was this incredibly dashing guy who did incredibly well over France. You know, when the odds are stacked against him because they didn't have any ground control or anything. and didn't have, an air defense system to help them. And then he was later killed in the Battle of Britain on the 18th of August, known as the hardest day. He was, he just disappeared and was his body was never recovered. And they've always had a bit of a kind of hold on me. And actually, it was a fantastic book, which was incredibly influential to me by Phil Craig and Tim Tim Clayton, called Finest Hour, which was all about 1940. And actually, it was they were the first people to suggest to me that actually you need to see the Battle of Britain in light of the Battle of France. You can't really separate the two. And one of the great characters in their book was Dickie Lee. And so, 85 Squadron and what they got up to in France and subsequently in the Battle of Britain, they later became a night fighter squadron. So they sort of slightly, no one's really interested in night fighter squadrons. So
he was, but Paddy Hemingway was shot down in 85 Squadron in the Battle for France.
Yeah.
And escaped. I mean, rescued by Belgian by Belgians who got him back to his squadron. The soldier cut a piece of metal out of his knee that he had in his knee from being shot down.
Yeah, amazing. Then he had engine failure in 1941 doing rhubarbs and over France and lost his plane, and that was the one that was recovered. And actually, a friend of mine, Rick Hillam, was very involved in excavating that. So he's been on my radar for a long time, as has 85 Squadron. I mean, I think the other thing is that it's so easy, and it's been part of the kind of the narrative of the Second World War and Britain's Second World War, certainly that it's the few, it's the White Cliffs of Dover, the sort of biscuit tins with Spitfires flying over the White Cliffs with a down Messerschmitt, on the top of Seven Sisters and stuff, and it's sort of, and this kind of sort of hard run thing, close run thing, and all the rest of it, and the Narrow Margin, which is one of his sort of, his iconic book that came out in the late 1960s about it. But actually, the more recent sort of scholarship on this has realigned it completely and seen it for what it really was, which is an absolutely crushing defeat of the Luftwaffe by superior tactics, better production of aircraft, better systems in the world's first fully coordinated air defense system, which is what we had over Great Britain, which is better known as the Dowding system. This is the sort of combination of radar and observers on the ground and control rooms and a means of identifying your own aircraft as opposed to the enemy aircraft. So it means you can not only can you anticipate when the enemy's coming, which means you can get off the ground. And so when they're hitting your airfield, they're not hitting you on the ground, which is how previous air forces have been destroyed in Poland, Scandinavia, and the Low Countries and France. None of that in the Battle of Britain. And you can control the battle. You can control the air battle from the ground, and that is truly revolutionary. Combine that with really slick, properly honed civilian repair organization, the CRO, which is kind of overhauled in the early summer of 1940, and increased production, overseen by Wilfred Freeman in the first instance. And then subsequently by the arrival of Lord Beaverbrook as Minister of Aircraft Production. Those two people, the country owes both of them a huge amount. Add that to home advantage, a pretty good set of fighter planes in the Spitfire and the Hurricane, and really well-trained pilots for the most part. And you've got a crushing victory against the Luftwaffe, from which it frankly never recovers, because the Luftwaffe, when you combine the losses over the summer of 1940 with the ongoing losses in the winter because of the Blitz, I mean, lots of bombers were being shot down in the process. It meant that by June, the third week of June 1941, when they're invading the Soviet Union at Operation Barbarossa, they've got less aircraft than they did on the 10th of May 1940. That speaks volumes of the wear and tear and attrition that's been wrought onto the Luftwaffe, and also the shortcomings of German fighter production and aircraft production.
Well, yes, and the Luftwaffe's essential problem that it can only fight one of the wars it's been asked to take part in. It can't fight. It can't fight in all of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a speech that Churchill makes in the summer of 1940 where he says, Hitler knows he must beat Britain, beat this country, or surely lose the war. And he's absolutely right.
Yeah. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to do, for those of you watching, we're going to say that we're going to take a quick break, but we're not. That's for the edit, for the podcast of this that's going to go out. So we're going to take a quick break.
Uh-oh, the last cookie.
You can get a new box of cookies in as fast as an hour with Walmart Express Delivery.
Are you my guilty self-conscience?
No, I'm the voice offering you promo code EXPRESS for free delivery on your first order.
Hey, who ate my cookies?
You mean, these cookies?
Order now. Welcome to your Walmart. Promotion valid for first express delivery order. $50 minimum subject to availability. Restrictions apply.
Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/credit card, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate pina colada and Thai-iced coffee-flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk. Now, we have lots of comments that I think would be worth just glancing at before we get on to the next thing we want to talk about. I mean, one of the points I think is making, Jim, is with all those systems in place, with the aircraft, decent fighter planes, you still need the spam in the can, as it were, the blokes to do it. And I think what's interesting is that that Paddy Hemingway is one of those people who had the gumption to get himself into a hurricane every time he was asked to, and get himself up there, and and make the most of those systems that are in place, and that things are there in order to and thank God, for all the Allied or the British material advantages in the and systemic advantages in the Battle of Britain. It's still the people. It's still people like Paddy Hemingway who have to do it. So that's the, and you need the right kind of people to be able to do that. And Britain and Great Britain and Ireland were producing the right kind of people. But anyway, John says hello from Dublin. Any good source of or more info on his escape with essentially the escape line operation near Ravenna when the Italian partisans got him back to Allied lines, because he was shot down, wasn't he, in Italy? Mm-hmm. Where would one find out about that? That's
well, there are quite a lot of books about escapes in Italy. First of all, of course, because of all the POWs that escape in excuse me, in September 1943. But there aren't organized escape lines as such in the same way as sort of get them down to the Pyrenees, get them over the Pyrenees, get them into Spain and then to Lisbon or whatever. It's not quite the same thing in Italy. It's get them close to the Allied lines, because of course the problem with France is why you're getting escape lines organized in France is because the whole place is occupied by the Germans or by Vichy France, and everywhere lurks the enemy. That's not the case in Italy. It's a case of kind of it depends on where you come down, of course, but quite often it's just a matter of sort of going over the next mountain. And it depends where you are. And don't forget that by the summer of 1944, the Allies are well north of Rome. Florence falls on something like the 4th of August, something like that. And then they're up against the sort of right up in the Apennines on a line of Ravenna by August, September. So it's there aren't escape lines as such. There are lots of partisans around, and you hope they're going to help you get there.
They're going to play ball.
Yeah, how are you going to play ball? Yeah.
85 Squadron were in 11 group, weren't they? So they're part of the sort of
yeah. Well, they were until I think early after end of August, where they were moved up to Yorkshire and into the quiet zone.
Yeah, and go into a night fight.
I mean, that's one of the sort of great things about the management of the Battle of Britain as well, is that these squadrons are all rotated, even in the kind of absolute heat of battle. So it's recognised that 85 Squadron been fighting in France. They then come over in the Battle of Britain. You know, they've done their bit. It's time for a change. Whereas the contrast with the Luftwaffe couldn't be more stark. Whereas, JG2 is in Normandy and is in Normandy the whole flipping time, and they don't move. And, JG 54 and 52 and stuff, they're up in the Pas-de-Calais, and they're there the whole time. And you just keep going. There's absolutely no question of being rotated out or anything. Yeah. The problem that the Luftwaffe has is because their fighter production is so low that they are forced to fly more and more, because unlike in a British squadron, you would never have more than 12 airborne at one time, but you are supposed to have kind of almost double the number of pilots and indeed aircraft to service that, so that you're not overflying them. So very often you might have 20 planes, 22 pilots. So when at the end of August, beginning of September, Keith Park, who's the commander of 11th Group in southeast England, because fighter command is divided into different groups across the whole of the UK. You've got 10 Group in up in the 10 groups in north. Anyway, 12 Group is kind of East Anglia and stuff. 11 Group is southeast England. Then there's 10 and there's 12 or whatever, and 13. And Park is the commander of the south in the southwest, London in the southeast. So that covers the kind of main heaviest volume of air fighting in the summer of 1940. So this is Kent, Sussex, London, North London, Essex, southern Essex, that kind of stuff. And they're worried at the beginning of September 1940 that they're down to 75% pilot strength. Right. But 75% pilot strength in a British squadron means 16 to 17 pilots rather than 22 or 24. Yeah. It doesn't mean 9. Yeah. Whereas a German Staffel, which is the equivalent of a squadron, has an establishment of 12, but very rarely has 12. Yeah. So they're almost always fighting at kind of 75%.
Yeah, they're always at stretch, yes.
Yeah, so in other words, British squadrons are not as stretched comparatively to German squadrons as Park and Dowding, the Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command, thinks they are. Yeah. Because they assume that the German system of the Staffel and Staffeln, so you have 3 Staffels per group, and then
it's a direct equivalent,
to a Jagdgeschwader. So you have a Jagdgeschwader as a fighter organization. Then you have a 1, 2, 3 groups, and then you have a 1, 2, 3 Staffeln in that, and that's how the system works. And Park and Dowding don't know that the German fighter system is based in this way. Yeah. So they assume that they're also, that they have the same structure, but they don't. Yeah. The problem they've got is that unlike British fighter squadrons, who almost always have full strength numbers of fighter planes every morning, because of the brilliance of the civilian prepare operation and because of the massively dramatically increased amount of fighter production.
Yeah, well, because
they never short of planes,
because of the simple home advantage. There's a simple home advantage, and also the fact that this is Fighter Command's role that they're basically that they're now leaning into. Whereas in the Battle of France, they're not in their role. That's why there's a dispute about which aircraft Dowding will allow released to deploy over France. Yeah, which doesn't particularly help. But that phase of the British campaign against the Germans in the summer of 1940, but whatever, they're in their role. Whereas the Luftwaffe are inventing their role as they go. It's a tactical air force, and suddenly it's being because of the course of the war, which has taken everyone by surprise. The Germans are more surprised by this state of affairs than, in a sense, Fighter Command are, because Fighter Command can now do the thing that they've been set up to do, which is defend London from bombing, and try and make sure that the bomber doesn't always get through. Whereas the Luftwaffe are going, right, what the hell do we do now?
I think there is a bit of that, but the point I was going to make is not only do they have longer lines of supply to get spare parts as new aircraft to these forward airfields in the Pas-de-Calais or Northern Normandy or wherever it might be, they also, their fighter production is not as good as that of the British. So their losses are not keeping pace with new types arriving.
Yeah.
So what that means is, say you've got a staffel of 12 aircraft, you might only have 9, but by the beginning of September, you might easily have 4 or 5 or 3 or even 2. And what tends to then happen is that the best pilots do the flying because they've got their 2 kites left or their 3 or 4 or whatever it might be. And they're thinking, well, I'm not going to let my some new sprog loose in my precious kite, so I'll fly it. And the net result of that is, rather than flying once or twice a day, some of them are flying up to 7 times a day by the middle to the end of September 1940.
Yeah.
And that is completely unsustainable
because
not only are they flying over enemy territory, they're also occupying what was enemy territory. So they've got none of the home advantage of being sort of slapped on the back and, when they're going to a bar in the evening or whatever, after they've been stood down. They've got none of that. And they're also having to do this 7 times. Well, 7 times a day or 4 times a day or 6 times a day is unbelievable because it's so physically and mentally draining. So the home advantage to the fighter command is just incalculable.
Yeah.
If you get shot down over southern England, you can be back in the air by 4:30. Whereas if you're a German aircrew and you get shot down over southern England, for you, my friend, the war is over.
Now the other, and I think it is interesting, isn't it, that nevertheless that the idea that we clung on in the face of great odds and all that. I mean, it's a very sticky idea, that, Jim.
Yeah,
and
and it has stuck,
and it's stuck, hasn't it?
But I think it's much more attractive to come up with the idea that we were actually unbelievably good. And we won because we were better in every single regard.
Oh, that's awful. I can't cope with that whatsoever.
You can't cope with that?
You can't with that. No. Underdog, scrappy underdog,
Yeah.
Come on then, Fritz, let's see what you got, rather than come at us, the Hun, we will crush you. It's,
Yeah. Come on.
Now
you got a question from Jason McNeil. Can we answer that one?
Sure, go on.
Could you discuss Beppo Schmidt and his dodgy intelligence? Well, yes, I absolutely can, James. So Beppo Schmidt was so this is absolutely pure Nazi nonsense. So you have General Martini, who is the overall intelligence chief of the Luftwaffe, who is a general, he's a Generalmajor, and you also have Oberst Beppo Schmidt, who is only a colonel, but is also on Goering's personal staff.
Yeah.
So he's actually, in practice, senior to Martini, even though he's massively reduced in rank.
Yeah.
Or much lower in rank. And the reason he does so well is because he's a beer hall putsch man from November 1943. He's a good Nazi, likes the ladies, likes a drink, and Goering likes the cut of his jib. And he has to do this intelligence brief for the Luftwaffe in July 1940, and it's called Study Blue or Studie Blau, and it's just full of absolute nonsense. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah,
and this is the intelligence brief for the Adler Angriff, the attack of the Eagles, which will be launched on Adler Tag, Eagle Day.
But it's full of. I reckon this, as far as I can tell. A bloke in a pub told me. They can't make fighters anyway because they're decadent. It's
the
full of that,
Zestora is twice the aircraft of the Hurricane.
Yeah.
The Zestora is an ME-110, which is a twin-engine plane and is nothing like as agile or maneuverable as a single-engine fighter. And no, it isn't better in a fighter role than a Hurricane. But the Zestora is a personal favorite of Goering's. It's he who has labeled it the Zestora, the destroyer. And Beppo Schmidt knows perfectly well that you don't tell Goering something that he doesn't want to hear. They have absolutely no idea that the RAF is split into different commands: Coastal Command, Bomber Command, Fighter Command, etc. No idea at all. Completely downplays the importance of the radar system. Has no conscience, no awareness at all that there is the Observer Corps as well. no understanding at all that this is part of a sort of coordinated air defense system. I mean, it is risible how bad it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But fortunately, that's the intelligence brief for the whole thing, and of course, it.
But I mean, earlier on, you were saying that Dowding and Park, for instance, don't know actually how the Luftwaffe is constituted, and I think it is worth bearing in mind that right at the start of the Second World War, no one in the UK knows anything about the German armed forces.
Not really.
They don't really know anything, and one of the first things they have to do at Bletchley is figure out what the words all mean. When they start cracking, German cipher, they have to figure out what does that refer to. What constitutes a division, and what does all this stuff actually amount to? And so I think yes, Beppo Schmidt's wrong, but he's wrong. He's wrong at the wrong time. It's his timing is lousy. And the fact that the Germans find themselves trying to do an air superiority campaign, which mutates into a strategic bombing campaign or something, the fact that they are also woefully poorly briefed on how to execute that, I mean, helps the RAF, but it's a state of mutual miscomprehension, isn't it? Let's be honest now.
It is.
It's not just the silly old Germans talking themselves into thinking things wrong about the British. British have done a fair slab of that when it comes to the Germans.
No, I think the big difference is I think that broadly speaking, the British overestimate German strength, while the Germans underestimate British strength.
Yeah, there we go.
And if you're defending, overestimating the strength of your enemy is probably not really a bad thing.
Yeah.
But if you're attacking, underestimating the strength of the enemy you're trying to attack really very much is a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, and I think just this whole concept of being outnumbered, that also needs needs readdressing, because what we tend to do is we tend to look at the strength of the Luftwaffe beginning of July, which is on paper 3,500, but actually is only about 2,500, of which around 1,000 are 1,200 or something are bombers, and the rest are a combination of and Stukas, and the rest are a combination of about 750 Me-109s and about 400 Me-110s, something like that. I haven't got the precise figures in front of me, but it's that kind of neck of the wood. Against, beginning of July, 640 single-engine fighters of Fighter Command. But you're not talking about that. You're actually, it's the RAF. If you're comparing the Luftwaffe to the RAF, you've got to compare the Luftwaffe to the RAF, not a small proportion of the RAF. And we are also sending over bombers every single day to France. And one of the things that's really interesting is you can look at, so when German aircrew were captured, the officers were taken to Trent Park, which is in northeast London.
Yep.
And there they were given sort of cups of cocoa and biscuits and stuff, and bread and jam, and looked off.
And more than that, were taken to the West End and were dined out.
Yeah, all that stuff. But they were also put in rooms together, which were bugged, and they then recorded all the conversations, and so they'd be grilled quite harshly, and I am saying nothing. My lips are closed, but then would open up, over cocoa and biscuits with their mates in this bugged room. And the conversations are all transcribed, and one can go and look at all these. And what's really interesting is the comments, a huge amount of comments from down German crew about how annoying it is and how dangerous it is and how terrifying it is constantly being bombed by the RAF. And you go, what? This is not part of the Battle of Britain narrative. But of course, they're doing it. Both Coastal Command and Bomber Command, whenever they can, they're hurtling over to the Pas-de-Calais, to, ports on the Channel coast where there's, mounting river barges being collected from the Rhine and stuff for this so-called invasion, and they're hammering them, and it's causing them sleepless nights. And of course, the problem you have when you have a very, very dense concentration of fighter aircrafts in the Pas-de-Calais, which you need because single-engine fighter planes have small amounts of fuel. And so you need them to be as close to the target as you possibly can. So, which is why they're all concentrated in Normandy and the Pas-de-Calais. That makes the Pas-de-Calais an incredibly target-rich environment. And while Bomber Command is not known for its accuracy in the early years of the war, it doesn't really need to be. It's just got to kind of fly over the coast of Calais, drop bombs, and chances are you're going to hit a fighter station. And that proves to be the case. And as a consequence of that, the Luftwaffe constantly keeps 2 fighter planes back at base for interception roles every time they're also on order to go over and fight over England.
And the other thing the Luftwaffe aren't in the habit of is anything like the light security that RAF stations have. So at night they're all lit up, and night fighters going over the Channel or across the North Sea and loitering at German. Later on during the Blitz, they do this. They go and loiter at German air bases and shoot bombers down as they return. Because they haven't turned the lights off, and so you know the Luftwaffe they're on their toes the whole time at night because bomber command are coming over, and in the end fighter command are sending night fighter squadrons over to shoot down bombers at night as well, because the Germans, you know, they're not thinking securely, they're not thinking defensively at all at this point.
Well, and just to go back to this whole thing about numbers and comparisons. So overall, the RAF's got about sort of 1,200 to 1,400 planes. The Luftwaffe's got sort of 2,400. You know, so it's still a disparity, but it's not 3 to 1. That's the point.
Yeah,
it's nothing like. And actually, you can deconstruct this stuff a little bit more. So one of the sort of reasons why the myths are perpetuated is because if you are one of 12 in your Hurricane squadron or your Spitfire squadron, and you're flying in some of those September battles, and you're seeing these huge formations coming over and attacking London, you're thinking, lorks, you know, there's me and you know, Paddy and Jimbo,
Binky and Lord Squiffy,
you know, there's just 12 of us against 300 aircraft. Of course, you feel incredibly outnumbered. And I remember Jeff saying to me, I can tell you when Brian Kinkham and I were flying at 240 Luftwaffe aircraft, we felt pretty outnumbered, and you can see exactly where he's coming from. Don't forget, at the time he's only 18 or something, 19. You know, he's very, very young. So of course you do. But if you take the 15th of September 1940, it's really, really interesting because of course the tactics are that you don't mass your Spitfire squadrons in one. You know, this is the whole anti-big wing. This is the whole problem with the big wing theory. Because to mass 15 squadrons or whatever it might be takes a hell of a long time. And you've got to get them in formation. And as soon as you get them into formation, you're restricting their ability to move freely.
Yeah.
So what Park does is he organizes his squadrons by September 1940 to operate in pairs. You know, so you have a Hurricane squadron and a Spitfire squadron taking off from the same airfield at the same time. Hurricanes hurtle in towards the bombers, which are operating at, let's say, sort of 14 to 18,000 feet off the deck, while the Spitfires are climbing high to go and intercept the fighters who are protecting those bombers. So you are one of 24 of those two lot, but that is happening every stage of the way. So first of all, they're taking off in you know, the tip of Kent, you know, from Manston or wherever, and then they're kind of coming in and they're coming in all the time and just constantly pecking the German formations. And if you look at Sunday the 15th of September 1940, which is, you know, now regarded as Battle of Britain Day, commemorated as Battle of Britain Day, the two big raids that happen, the first one peaks at around 12:30, just before lunch, and total enemy planes coming over is about 75, of which 25 are Dornier 17s and 50 are a combination of ME-110s and ME-109s. Fighting them. So against them are 280 Spitfires and Hurricanes collectively. The second raid peaks around 3 o'clock over southeast England. That's a raid of 300 enemy aircraft, of which 100 are bombers and 200 are fighter escorts of 110s and 109s. But arraigned against them are 335 Spitfires and Hurricanes. So collectively, they're attacking, and they're not even outnumbered. I mean, they are. I mean, they haven't even got a numerical advantage. They're actually being outnumbered by the defenders. So my point is, it's how you look at it. And of course, as an individual pilot, you feel outnumbered, but collectively. You're not, and I think it's the job of the historian to kind of look at this. Well, separate the myth from the reality and look at it in the whole.
Well, let's look at a single pilot's assertion that, about the Battle of Britain, Adolf Galland, who said the Battle of Britain was a draw. Now, I know what you're going to say about this, Jim, but this is what I think. It might you can call it a draw if you want,
Adolf.
if you want, but you had to win, right? And maybe, and if it is a draw, then it's a high score draw. You know, it's 9-9 all. You know, and you have to win. You can't settle for a draw. And what this is poor old Adolf Galland completely incapable of admitting that they lost. Of course, they don't. The Germans don't have a Battle of Britain, do they? They have an Angriff an England. They don't. There is no Battle of Britain in their thinking. That it's all part of the entire air campaign that then mutates into the Blitz that runs till May the following year. There is no Battle of Britain in the way that Churchill articulates it. But then they, you know, you're looking at two different mindsets there. The Germans can never admit that they've lost anything, so they're never going to, right? You know, even
they're quite Trumpian.
Well, you know, Otto Klemperer's diaries are from 1944, where he's going, how can we have won yet another shattering victory over the Soviets if we're going backwards? He says the language doesn't mean anything anymore. That's what he says about living under, you know, in the Nazi framing. Whereas Churchill needs a win, so he's gonna call the Battle of Britain a win, even if it's Adolf Galland's draw, which it isn't, right? So, you know, we need a win. We need a futile gesture at this stage of the war, Perkins. We need a win. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, okay. So let me say my piece on this. I mean, that is just absolute twaddle of the highest order. And you know, fine, you're a very successful fighter pilot, and you ended up being the General de Flieger by 1943. You know, well done. But the truth is this: that at the start of the Battle of Britain, Fighter Command had around 640 single engine fighters. By the end of it, they had about 780, something like that. The Luftwaffe had around 740, 50 single engine fighters at the start of the Battle of Britain. By the end, they had barely 200. They lost.
No, it's a draw, Jim.
And out of 138 airfields in the whole of the UK, one was put out of action for more than 48 hours. Operation Sea Lion had to be abandoned. So from a tactical point of view, they lost. From an operational point of view, they lost because they were hemorrhaging both pilots and aircrew and aircraft. And from a strategic point of view, their strategic aims weren't fulfilled. So every which way you look at it, that's a failure. Whereas tactically, Fighter Command wins. That's a massive tick. Operationally, very much so, because it's stronger when it ends than it starts. And strategically, it keeps the war going and consigns Hitler to going into the Soviet Union far earlier than he originally planned, with catastrophic results, and he ultimately loses the war. I mean, the Battle of Britain, make no mistake, is a war-changing, war-turning moment. It is a moment of the highest strategic importance. At the start of the summer, the beginning of June 1940, they're staring down the barrel. It looks like the Germans have done it. They've pulled it off. They've got the ultimate victory. By the end of the summer, the whole German war strategy is in complete disarray and complete tatters.
Thing is, I've always had an issue with Adolf Galland taking him seriously, because in one of Spike Milligan's books, there's a photo of Galland getting out of a 109, and he's sort of squatting as he climbs out of the cockpit, and Milligan captions it as Adolf Galland taking a shit in his Messerschmitt. So whenever anyone says Adolf Galland, I think of that picture from whichever
there you go.
From whichever Spike Milligan book it is. So there you go. I find it quite hard to take seriously.
Yeah, very.
Anyway, thanks everyone for watching. The passing of John Paddy Hemingway. I mean, it's
traumatic. I think it is
marker,
traumatic. I think it's an absolutely massive moment, and I'm not sad for him because he lived to 105 and he had an incredible life. I'm sad for all those he leaves behind, and thoughts with Brian and his family. But I am sad about it. It's a big moment. That incredible generation, the few, they've gone. That's it. That is it. And thank goodness I had a chance to meet them when I did. I mean, the good thing is their words are still with us. So many of them recorded, written books, written memoirs. There's oral transcripts in the Imperial War Museum. I've got stuff which I'm very happy to share. We've still got film footage of Tom Neal, Hans Eckhard Bob, and various others, which we've got in our archive hour, which we will be bringing to our exciting new website, worldwar2headquarters.com, in due course. So you can still hear these guys speaking. But it's a big moment. I feel really very wistful about it.
Well, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for joining us. We will see you all again very, very soon.
Yep, and we've just so you know, we've got Family Stories on Thursday. Iwo Jima 2-parter next week with John McManus. And our new Veteran Europe series is coming up next month.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you again very soon. Cheerio.
Cheerio.